At 49 years old, Marcus Hale thought he had lost everything that mattered. After more than 20 years working in the hotel industry, he walked into the office one ordinary Monday morning and walked out unemployed before lunch. Corporate restructuring, budget reductions, position eliminated. The words sounded professional. The reality felt devastating. His savings were shrinking. His confidence was gone. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus had absolutely no idea what came next. Then a lawyer called with news that sounded too strange to be real. A distant aunt he barely remembered had passed away, and somehow she had left him her inheritance. At first, Marcus imagined a small savings account, maybe enough money to buy a little time, maybe enough to catch his breath. Instead, he inherited an abandoned desert motel sitting beside a forgotten highway and exactly $186 in debt. That was it. No fortune, no hidden wealth, no valuable business, just a dying motel that barely had any guests and a debt attached to the property. When Marcus arrived in the desert town to see it for the first time, people couldn't stop laughing. Some told him to sell immediately. Others said the building should have been demolished years ago. The motel was falling apart. Half the rooms were empty. The old highway had moved miles away decades earlier, and according to almost everyone in town, the place wasn't worth saving. But while sorting through his aunt's belongings, Marcus found something that made absolutely no sense. A brass room tag, old, worn, covered in dust, stamped with a simple number, room 12. The problem: the motel only had 11 rooms, at least. That's what everyone claimed. And when Marcus pulled out the original building plans to prove the tag was a mistake, he discovered something even stranger. A room appeared on the blueprints. A room that should have existed. A room that somehow disappeared. A room no one wanted to talk about. And what Marcus eventually found hidden behind those walls would uncover a secret that had been buried beneath desert dust for decades. But before he could discover what was inside the missing room, he first had to answer one terrifying question. Why did someone go through so much effort to erase it from history? Stay with me, because this inheritance was never about a motel, and the missing room was only the beginning. Before we start, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Leave a comment below and let me know. Whether you're starting your morning, ending a long day, or listening before bed, I hope you're doing well, and I wish you a wonderful day ahead. If you enjoy heartwarming mysteries, hidden inheritances, forgotten histories, secret rooms, and stories about second chances later in life, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And if you notice any mistakes or have suggestions that could make future stories even better, leave a comment below. I read every one and truly appreciate your feedback. Now, settle in and let's begin. At 49 years old, Marcus Hale never expected to lose his career in less than 15 minutes. One moment he was walking into the regional headquarters of Horizon Hospitality, carrying a coffee and reviewing occupancy reports. The next, he was sitting across from two corporate executives who spoke with carefully rehearsed sympathy while eliminating the position he had spent 23 years building. Restructuring, one of them explained. Market adjustments, said the other. Marcus barely heard either. He simply stared at the folder being pushed across the conference table. Severance details, benefits information, instructions for returning company property. 23 years reduced to paperwork. By noon, he was carrying a cardboard box through the parking lot. A few personal photographs, several plaques, a coffee mug someone had given him years ago. Nothing else. The automatic doors closed behind him, and just like that, his career was over. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every traffic light seemed to last forever. Every mile gave him more time to think. The truth was simple. He wasn't 25. Starting over at 49 felt different, harder. Most hotel management positions required relocation. Competition was fierce, and after a divorce that had drained much of his savings, Marcus didn't have the financial cushion he once enjoyed. By the end of the first week, anxiety settled over him like desert dust. Every morning began with job applications. Every afternoon brought polite rejection emails. Every evening ended with spreadsheets calculating expenses, mortgage, insurance, utilities, groceries. The numbers never looked better. 2 months passed, then 3. His savings account grew smaller. His confidence followed. One Tuesday afternoon, Marcus sat at his kitchen table reviewing bills when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered. "Marcus Hale." A professional voice responded. "Mr. Hale? My name is Douglas Mercer. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Eleanor Briggs." Marcus frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "I'm sorry, who?" "Eleanor Briggs, your aunt." It took several seconds for the memory to return. Family reunions decades ago. Holiday cards that occasionally appeared in the mail. An older woman who always seemed to live somewhere in the desert. "I haven't seen her in years." "I'm sorry to inform you that she passed away several months ago." Marcus leaned back in his chair. Unexpected sadness touched him. They weren't close. Yet another piece of his past had quietly disappeared. "I'm sorry to hear that." Mrs. Briggs left specific instructions regarding her estate. Marcus rubbed his forehead. "I think there must be a mistake." "There isn't." Papers shuffled on the other end of the call. "You are listed as sole beneficiary." Silence followed. "Beneficiary?" "Yes." Marcus laughed softly. "You definitely have the wrong person. I assure you I do not." The attorney sounded amused. "Your aunt left you her motel." Marcus blinked. "Her what?" "A motel." "A motel?" "Correct." Marcus stared at the stack of overdue bills sitting on the table. "Why would she leave me a motel?" "I couldn't say." The lawyer paused. "However, there is an attached financial obligation." Marcus laughed again. "Of course there is." $186. "What?" "A debt associated with the property." Marcus shook his head. "So let me understand this. I inherit a motel and $186 of debt?" "Technically, yes." For the first time in weeks, he smiled. Life clearly wasn't finished surprising him. 4 days later, Marcus sat inside the attorney's office reviewing documents. The motel sounded even less impressive on paper. Located beside an aging desert highway, low occupancy, minimal commercial value, significant maintenance issues. Most investors would walk away immediately. "You may refuse the inheritance," the attorney explained. Marcus studied the paperwork. "And if I accept, the property becomes yours, including the debt." Including the debt. Common sense suggested saying no, yet something about the situation intrigued him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was because he had spent months feeling as though life had stopped moving forward. At least this represented something different. An opportunity. A distraction. A reason to leave the house. Whatever the reason, he signed the documents. Before leaving, the attorney handed him a small cardboard box. These belonged to Eleanor. Marcus examined the contents later that evening. Photographs, receipts, notes, old motel advertisements, several postcards. Most seemed ordinary. Yet one item immediately caught his attention. A heavy brass room tag attached to a faded key ring. The number stamped into the metal read, Rooms 12. Marcus smiled. At least the motel had 12 rooms. It sounded more respectable than 11. The next morning, he loaded his car and began the drive. The journey took most of the day. Cities gradually disappeared behind him. Highways stretched endlessly across open desert. Gas stations became less frequent. Mountains rose in the distance. The farther he traveled, the more isolated the landscape became. By late afternoon, he reached the outskirts of Dry Creek. The town looked small enough to miss if someone blinked while driving. A diner, a gas station, a hardware store. Several weathered buildings standing beneath a cloudless sky. Marcus stopped for fuel and asked for directions to the motel. The cashier immediately recognized the location. "You're Eleanor's nephew." Marcus nodded. The woman smiled sadly. She was a good woman. Then her expression changed. Shame about that old place. Similar reactions followed twice more before he finally located the narrow road leading out of town. The motel appeared several miles later beside an aging stretch of highway. Marcus slowed the car. For several seconds, he simply stared. The building looked tired, not ruined, not abandoned, just forgotten. A faded neon sign leaned slightly to one side. Several windows needed repairs. Paint peeled from exterior walls. Empty parking spaces stretched beneath the desert sun. Yet despite its condition, the place possessed character, history. The sort of roadside motel travelers once relied upon before interstate highways bypassed towns like Dry Creek. Marcus parked near the office and stepped outside. Warm desert air surrounded him immediately. Silence filled the landscape. The motel stood alone against an endless horizon. He found himself wondering how many travelers had passed through over the decades. How many stories these rooms contained. As sunset approached, Marcus unlocked the office and stepped inside. Dust covered most surfaces. Guest books occupied shelves behind the counter. Old photographs hung on the walls. The place felt frozen in time. He spent nearly an hour exploring. Eventually, he returned to the cardboard box of Eleanor's belongings and began sorting through everything more carefully. The brass room tag appeared again near the bottom. Room 12. Curious. Marcus carried it into the parking lot and counted the motel doors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He stopped, counted again, then a third time. 11 rooms, not 12. Marcus frowned and looked back at the brass tag resting in his hand. Room 12. The motel only had 11 rooms. Marcus barely slept during his first night at the motel. The desert became surprisingly quiet after sunset. No traffic, no distant city noise. Just wind moving across open land and the occasional creak of an aging building settling into cooler temperatures. Around midnight, he found himself standing outside the office, staring at the row of motel rooms. 11 doors. He counted them again, then again. The brass tag still rested in his pocket. Room 12. Yet no 12th room existed. By sunrise, the mystery felt less amusing and more irritating. Somewhere there had to be an explanation. The next morning, Marcus began exploring the property properly. The motel occupied more land than he initially realized. Behind the main building stood several storage sheds. A maintenance garage sat near the edge of the property. An abandoned picnic area overlooked the desert beyond. Everything needed repairs. Everything needed attention. Yet despite its condition, Marcus saw potential. Years of hotel management had trained him to notice possibilities beneath neglect. Fresh paint, updated landscaping, modern signage. The motel could work again. The problem was money. He barely had enough savings to cover his own expenses, let alone renovate an entire property. Still, keeping busy felt better than sitting at home waiting for rejection emails. Around mid-morning, the sound of a pickup truck interrupted his thoughts. A dusty blue truck rolled into the parking lot and stopped beside the office. A man climbed out carrying a toolbox and a thermos. He appeared to be in his late 30s. Broad shoulders, sun-weathered face, the kind of person who looked comfortable fixing almost anything. "You Marcus?" the man called. Marcus nodded. "Depends who's asking." The stranger laughed. "Ryan Torres." He extended a hand. "I've handled repairs around here for years." Marcus shook it. "Good to meet you." Ryan glanced toward the motel. "Sorry about Eleanor." Marcus nodded. "Seems like everyone knew her. Most people did." Ryan smiled. "Hard not to." Before Marcus could respond, the passenger door flew open. A teenage girl jumped out, carrying a backpack covered in stickers. Some featured books. Others showed maps and puzzles. She hurried toward the motel with obvious curiosity. "Dad, is this really the place?" Ryan sighed dramatically. "You see what I deal with," Marcus laughed. "I'm guessing that's your daughter." "Unfortunately." Ryan grinned. "Lily." The girl rolled her eyes. "Very funny." Then she immediately turned to Marcus. "Can I look around?" Marcus shrugged. "I don't see why not." "Awesome." Before either man could say another word, she was already exploring the parking lot. Ryan shook his head. "She's incapable of minding her own business." "Sounds useful." "Usually is." Over the next hour, Ryan helped Marcus inspect the property. Plumbing issues, electrical concerns, roof damage. The list seemed endless. Yet Ryan remained surprisingly optimistic. "Most of this is fixable." Marcus looked toward the sagging motel sign. "You're more optimistic than I am." Ryan laughed. "Maybe." During a break, they sat beneath a faded shade structure drinking coffee. The conversation eventually turned toward Eleanor. "People keep telling me she was unusual," Marcus said. Ryan smiled. "That's one way to put it." "Meaning?" Ryan considered the question. "Most folks thought she was eccentric." "How eccentric?" "She cared about things nobody else cared about." Marcus frowned. "Like what?" Ryan looked toward the motel. "Travelers." "Travelers?" "Strangers, people passing through, folks who needed help." He shrugged. Eleanor never seemed interested in making money. The statement surprised Marcus. "She owned a motel?" "Exactly." Ryan laughed softly, and somehow managed to treat it like a community center. The comment stayed with Marcus long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, while inspecting a storage shed behind the office, he discovered dozens of old guest ledgers stacked inside dusty cabinets. Most dated back decades. Others appeared newer. The records seemed meticulously organized. Strange for someone supposedly uninterested in business. As the sun began lowering toward the horizon, Lily burst into the office carrying a rolled-up tube nearly as tall as she was. "Found something." Marcus looked up from a maintenance report. "What now?" The teenager dropped the tube onto the desk. Dust exploded into the air. This was hidden in a cabinet. Ryan immediately recognized the expression on his daughter's face. Whenever she says that, trouble follows. Lily ignored him. "Open it." Curious, Marcus removed the cap and carefully unrolled the contents across the desk. A blueprint. The original motel blueprint. Ryan immediately moved closer. Now that's interesting. The document appeared old but remarkably well preserved. Every room, every hallway, every utility line, everything had been carefully drafted. Marcus studied the layout. 11 guest rooms lined the building exactly as expected. Then he froze. His pulse quickened. "Wait." Lily leaned forward. "What?" Marcus pointed toward the far end of the structure. Another room appeared on the blueprint, clearly labeled, clearly drawn, clearly part of the original design. Room 12. Silence settled across the office. Ryan frowned. "That's impossible." Marcus stared at the drawing. Apparently not. The room existed, not in theory, not as a scribbled note, as part of the official blueprint. The brass room tag suddenly made perfect sense. At some point, the motel really had a 12th room. Lily looked genuinely delighted. "I knew something was weird." Marcus continued studying the plans. The dimensions appeared correct. The room connected to the main hallway. Utility lines ran into the space. Every detail suggested it had once physically existed. Yet he had walked the property multiple times. There was no room 12, no extra door, no missing wing. Nothing. Ryan scratched his head. Maybe it was demolished. Marcus shook his hand. Then where are the records? Nobody answered, because the question was valid. Hotels documented everything. Renovations, structural changes, demolitions. There should be paperwork, permits, something. As evening approached, Marcus continued examining the blueprint. The longer he looked, the stranger it became. Certain sections near room 12 showed signs of modification, not damage, alteration. Pencil markings partially erased, measurements changed, notes removed. Lily noticed first. "Hold on." Marcus looked up. "What?" She pointed toward the area surrounding room 12. "Those lines aren't original." Ryan moved closer. Silence filled the office again. The teenager was right. Several portions of the blueprint had been deliberately altered. Not by age, not by wear, by someone. Marcus leaned closer to the paper. Beneath the revisions, faint traces of earlier markings remained visible. Hidden notes, hidden measurements, hidden details. Someone hadn't simply removed room 12 from the motel. Someone had tried to remove it from the plans, too. The altered blueprint turned a simple curiosity into an obsession. Marcus had arrived in Dry Creek expecting to spend a few weeks deciding whether the motel was worth keeping. Instead, he found himself staring at a set of plans that showed a room which no longer existed. A room that had once been part of the building. A room someone had deliberately tried to erase from the blueprints. The mystery lingered in his thoughts long after Ryan and Lily left for the evening. Before going to bed, he walked the length of the motel 3 separate times. 11 doors, 11 rooms, nothing more. Yet the blueprint insisted otherwise. Somewhere, something didn't add up. The next morning, Marcus decided to focus on practical problems. The motel desperately needed repairs. If he spent all day chasing mysteries, the property would continue falling apart around him. By sunrise, he was patching damaged drywall inside room 4. An hour later, he repaired a leaking faucet in room 7. After that came broken light fixtures, cracked window seals, and loose plumbing connections. The work felt oddly satisfying. For the first time in months, he wasn't sending resumes or waiting for phone calls. He was accomplishing something tangible. By mid-morning, Ryan arrived with tools and coffee. "How many things have you fixed?" he asked. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. "Not enough." Ryan laughed. "Welcome to motel ownership." They spent several hours working together. The motel slowly began looking less abandoned. A broken sign was repaired. Several damaged doors were adjusted. Weeds disappeared from the parking lot. None of the improvements were dramatic, but they mattered. Around lunchtime, Lily appeared carrying a notebook and a tape measure. Marcus immediately recognized trouble. "What are you doing?" The teenager grinned. "Investigating." Ryan sighed. "I told you, investigating what?" Marcus asked. Lily looked genuinely offended. "The missing room." Marcus laughed. "Of course." While the men continued repairs, Lily wandered throughout the property measuring walls, hallways, and room dimensions. Every so often, she scribbled notes into her notebook before moving to another section of the motel. Marcus paid little attention until nearly an hour later. "That's weird." Her voice echoed down the hallway. Marcus looked up from a toolbox. "What is?" Lily appeared carrying the tape measure. "Come here." Ryan immediately started smiling. "This should be good." The three gathered inside the central hallway running through the motel. Lily pointed toward one side of the building. "Look." Marcus looked. "I'm looking." "No, measure." She handed him the tape measure, somewhat amused. Marcus checked the dimensions. Then he measured again. His smile faded. "Wait." Lily crossed her arms. "Exactly." Ryan moved closer. "What?" Marcus walked to the opposite side of the hallway and measured again. Then once more. Silence settled over the corridor. The numbers didn't make sense. From outside, the building appeared wider than the combined dimensions of the rooms and hallway inside. Not dramatically wider, but enough. Several feet seemed unaccounted for. Ryan frowned. "Maybe it's insulation." Marcus shook his head. "Not that much." Lily looked entirely too pleased with herself. "Told you." Marcus grabbed the blueprint and spread it across a nearby table. Together they compared measurements, room by room, wall by wall. Every calculation produced the same result. The motel contained more space than it should, or perhaps less, depending on how one looked at it. Ryan stared at the figures. "You're saying part of the building is missing?" Marcus pointed toward the plans. "I'm saying there's empty space somewhere." The realization changed everything until now. Room 12 existed only on paper. Now, physical evidence suggested something unusual actually existed inside the structure itself. An entire section of the building didn't match the blueprint. The rest of the afternoon disappeared into investigation. Marcus measured every room. Ryan checked exterior walls. Lily filled pages with notes. The deeper they looked, the stranger things became. Certain hallway dimensions seemed inconsistent. Several walls appeared thicker than necessary. One section of the motel produced measurements that simply refused to make sense. Eventually, they focused on the area where room 12 should have been. According to the blueprint, the room once occupied the far end of the eastern wing. Today, that location contained only a blank hallway wall. Marcus studied it carefully. Nothing appeared unusual, just painted drywall. Yet the measurements suggested otherwise. Ryan knocked on the surface. Solid. Then another section, slightly different. Then another. Marcus listened carefully. Most areas produced a familiar sound. One section did not. The difference was subtle, barely noticeable, yet it existed. Lily immediately heard it too. "There!" Ryan tapped again. Silence followed. Marcus stepped closer. The wall looked ordinary, yet something about it bothered him. The texture seemed slightly different from surrounding sections. Not newer, just altered. As though repairs had once been performed and then carefully concealed. "Get the blueprint," Marcus said quietly. Lily already had it open. Together they compared wall locations against the original plans. The result made Marcus's pulse quicken. The unusual section aligned almost perfectly with the missing room 12. Not beside it, not near it, directly over it. Ryan slowly folded his arms. "Well?" Marcus stared at the wall. "Yeah." The three stood in silence for several moments. Outside, wind moved across the desert. Somewhere in the distance, a truck traveled along the old highway. Inside the motel, the mystery suddenly felt much more real. Lily walked closer to the wall and placed her hand against it. "If the room was removed," she said, "where did it go?" Nobody answered, because the question sounded ridiculous. Rooms didn't disappear. Buildings weren't magic. A room couldn't simply stop existing. Yet the evidence increasingly pointed toward an uncomfortable possibility. Marcus examined the baseboards, then the ceiling, then the corners. Every detail suggested the wall had been added after construction, carefully, professionally, deliberately. Someone hadn't demolished room 12. Someone had sealed it off. Ryan finally broke the silence. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Marcus nodded slowly. The blueprint, the brass room tag, the altered measurements, the strange wall. For the first time, all the pieces seemed connected. He looked once more at the section of hallway where room 12 should have been, then at the empty space hidden beyond it. Somewhere behind that wall sat several feet of unaccounted-for space, space large enough to contain an entire room. Marcus felt a chill despite the desert heat, because after 2 days of searching for answers, one possibility had become impossible to ignore. Room 12 might not be missing at all. It might still be there. Marcus spent most of the night thinking about the wall. Every logical explanation seemed less convincing than the last. Maybe the measurements were wrong. Maybe the blueprints were inaccurate. Maybe decades of renovations had altered the structure in ways nobody remembered. Yet every possibility led back to the same uncomfortable fact. Several feet of the building were unaccounted for. Space existed where no space should exist. And according to the original plans, room 12 occupied exactly that location. By sunrise, he had already made up his mind. He needed answers. Ryan arrived shortly after 8, carrying tools and coffee. Lily appeared less than 5 minutes later carrying her notebook and enough excitement for 3 people. "We're opening the wall today, aren't we?" she asked before saying hello. Marcus smiled despite himself. "That's the plan." Ryan shook his head. "I should have known." The 3 stood in the hallway facing the section of drywall that had become the center of their investigation. In daylight, it looked perfectly ordinary. Plain paint, standard trim, no visible doors, no hidden handles, nothing to suggest an entire room might be concealed behind it. Yet the blueprint resting nearby told a different story. Marcus ran his hand across the surface. If this was sealed, whoever did it knew what they were doing. Ryan nodded. "Looks professional." "Which means we're about to ruin somebody's work." Lily grinned. Good. Ryan laughed. You really enjoy this, don't you? Very much. Marcus marked a small inspection section near the center of the wall. Then Ryan handed him a pry bar. For several seconds, he hesitated, not because he doubted the decision, because something about the moment felt significant. The mystery had consumed nearly every conversation since arriving in Dry Creek. Now they were finally about to learn whether Room 12 truly existed. Marcus drove the tool into the drywall. A sharp crack echoed through the hallway. Dust drifted into the air. Ryan widened the opening while Lily watched impatiently. Another section broke away, then another. A hollow cavity appeared behind the wall. Silence followed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Marcus shined a flashlight through the opening. Empty space stared back. His pulse quickened. Well, Ryan said quietly, that's definitely not insulation. They carefully removed additional sections. The opening widened. More hidden space appeared. Several feet of concealed area stretched beyond the visible wall. Marcus climbed through first. His flashlight beam swept across darkness. Dust filled the air. The smell of old wood and forgotten years surrounded him. Then the light found something unexpected. A door. No way, Lily whispered from behind him. Marcus slowly approached. The door stood several feet beyond the concealed wall, painted the same color as the surrounding structure, hidden perfectly from the hallway. Time had covered it with dust, but there was no mistaking what it was. An entrance. Room 12. Ryan stared in disbelief. Somebody built a wall just to hide a door. Marcus nodded slowly. Looks that way. His hand closed around the handle. The metal felt cold despite the desert heat outside. He turned it carefully. The mechanism resisted at first. Then something shifted. A faint click echoed through the darkness. The door swung inward. Stale air escaped from the room beyond, air that hadn't moved in decades. Nobody spoke. They simply stared into the darkness. Then Marcus stepped inside. Room 12 still existed. The room appeared smaller than the others, but surprisingly well preserved. Dust covered everything. Sheets draped over furniture. A single bed occupied one corner. Shelves lined another wall. Time seemed frozen. Unlike the rest of the motel, almost nothing had been removed. It looked less like an abandoned room and more like a space intentionally preserved. Lily slowly entered behind him. This is incredible. Ryan looked around carefully. This wasn't hidden by accident. Marcus agreed. Every detail suggested purpose. Someone wanted the room forgotten, yet someone also wanted it protected. The contradiction immediately caught his attention. For the next hour they explored. Most furniture appeared ordinary. A desk, several chairs, filing cabinets, boxes. Nothing obviously valuable. Yet nearly every item had been carefully organized. Eleanor clearly used the room for something important. Marcus opened the first cabinet. Inside sat folders arranged by year. Guest names filled many of the documents. Others contained handwritten notes, receipts, correspondence. The deeper he looked, the stranger the records became. Many names never appeared in the motel's official ledgers. Some guests stayed for days, others for weeks. Yet according to the public records, they had never checked in. That's weird, Lily said. Marcus nodded. Very. Another cabinet contained photographs. Families, travelers, trucks parked outside the motel, community events. Most images looked decades old. Yet Eleanor had preserved every one. Ryan opened a storage box near the bed. More records. Marcus moved closer. Journals, dozens of them, leather-bound notebooks stacked neatly together. The sight immediately caught his attention. If Eleanor hid an entire room, she probably documented the reasons. He selected the nearest journal and opened it carefully. The pages contained handwritten entries stretching across years. Some discussed motel operations. Others described weather conditions, repairs, and community events. Yet many entries focused on people. Travelers, strangers, families passing through town. The same theme appeared again and again. Eleanor wrote about helping them, housing them, feeding them, assisting them during difficult periods. The motel seemed to serve a purpose beyond business. Marcus turned another page, then another. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Several matched records found inside the filing cabinets. Others appeared nowhere else. The more he read, the more curious he became. Then a phrase caught his eye, underlined, repeated, written larger than the surrounding text. The travelers still matter. Marcus frowned. He turned several pages. The phrase appeared again. The travelers still matter. Later, it appeared once more. Then again. Over and over. Different years, different situations. Same words. Lily noticed immediately. That's weird. Marcus nodded. Very weird. Ryan leaned closer. What do you think it means? Nobody answered, because they didn't know. Yet Eleanor clearly considered the phrase important. Important enough to repeat across decades of journals. Important enough to underline repeatedly. Marcus continued reading. The travelers still matter. The words echoed through entry after entry, sometimes appearing alone, sometimes attached to notes about assistance, shelter, or financial help, always present, always emphasized. As sunset approached, the three sat surrounded by discoveries. Hidden guest records, photographs, journals, a concealed room nobody knew existed. Yet despite everything they found, the mystery only grew larger. Who were these travelers? Why had Eleanor hidden records about them? Why conceal an entire room? Marcus closed the journal and stared at the words one final time. The travelers still matter. Outside, desert winds moved across the old highway. Inside, room. 12 decades of secrets waited patiently in the darkness. And for the first time since opening the hidden door, Marcus realized the room itself wasn't the mystery. The real mystery was the people Eleanor spent her life protecting. Who were the travelers? The hidden room transformed the motel from a struggling property into a mystery Marcus couldn't ignore. For 3 days, he barely thought about job applications or financial problems. Every spare moment was spent inside room 12. The concealed space contained dozens of boxes, filing cabinets, photographs, and journals. Each discovery raised new questions. Yet one question stood above all the others. Who were the travelers Eleanor's journals returned to the phrase repeatedly? The travelers still matter. She wrote it during different years, different situations, different seasons. The words clearly meant something important. Marcus just didn't know what. On the 4th morning, he sat inside room 12 reviewing guest records while sunlight filtered through a dusty window. Lily occupied the floor surrounded by boxes of photographs. Ryan repaired shelving damaged by age. For nearly an hour, nobody spoke. Then Lily suddenly looked up. These people aren't tourists. Marcus glanced over. What? She held up several photographs. families, elderly couples, workers standing beside old pickup trucks, children sitting outside motel rooms.
Nobody looks like they're on vacation.
Ryan walked over and examined the pictures. She's right. Marcus studied the photographs more carefully. The teenager had noticed something important. Most guests appeared tired, worn down. Many photographs captured people carrying everything they owned. Others showed vehicles loaded with belongings.
The images felt less like vacation memories and more like records.
Documentation. Maybe they were moving, Ryan suggested. Marcus wasn't convinced. The journals described repeated visits from people facing hardship, financial struggles, housing problems, emergencies. The photographs seemed to support that pattern. Later that afternoon, Marcus decided they needed more information than old records could provide. The people in Dry Creek remembered Eleanor. Maybe they remembered her guests, too. Their first stop was the diner near Main Street. The owner immediately recognized Eleanor's name. "Good woman," she said. "Always was." Marcus nodded. He had heard the same phrase repeatedly.
Do you remember many travelers staying at her motel?
The woman smiled thoughtfully. "Some. Anything unusual?" She hesitated. "Depends what you mean." Marcus explained the hidden room, the guest records, the journals. The woman listened quietly. Then her expression changed. "You know," she said slowly, "a lot of people passed through Dry Creek back then." "Travelers?" "Not exactly." Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the diner before lowering her voice. "People looking for another chance." The answer wasn't particularly clear, yet it lingered with Marcus long after they left. Their second interview produced similar results, then a third, then a fourth. Again and again. Longtime residents described strangers arriving in town during difficult periods of their lives, families running out of money, workers looking for employment, people escaping personal hardships. Most stayed only briefly, yet many somehow ended up at Eleanor's motel. One elderly mechanic remembered repairing vehicles for several travelers who couldn't afford the work. Another resident recalled families staying for weeks during difficult economic periods. A retired teacher remembered children attending local schools temporarily while their parents searched for jobs. None of the stories sounded dramatic, yet together they formed a pattern. Eleanor's motel wasn't simply a business. It was a refuge, a place people turned when they had nowhere else to go. That evening, Marcus returned to room 12 with a notebook full of observations. The interviews answered some questions, yet others remained. Why hide the room? Why conceal the records? And why repeatedly refer to guests as travelers instead of customers? He began comparing interview notes against the guest files. Names slowly started matching. Families mentioned by local residents appeared throughout Eleanor's records. So did workers, widows, and people struggling through difficult circumstances. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Most guests weren't tourists. They were people in trouble. The following morning brought another breakthrough. While organizing motel ledgers, Lily noticed something unusual. "Marcus," he looked up.
What?
She held up 2 books.
These don't match.
Marcus joined her at the desk. One ledger contained official motel registrations. The other came from room 12. At first, the difference seemed minor. Then he noticed the names. Entire groups of guests appeared in Eleanor's records, but not in the official registration book. He frowned. That's odd. Lily flipped through additional pages. The pattern repeated, again and again. Some visitors appeared normally, Others did not. Ryan joined them. "What are we looking at?" Marcus compared dates. "Missing guests." Ryan frowned. "Meaning?" Marcus held up both books. "These people stayed here." He pointed toward Eleanor's records, then toward the official register. "But according to the motel, they never checked in." Silence followed. Lily immediately understood. "She left them off the books." Marcus nodded slowly. More comparisons revealed the same thing. Some names appeared only inside Room 12 records. Others appeared nowhere outside Eleanor's journals. Entire families existed in one set of documents while remaining completely absent from another. The discovery changed the direction of the investigation immediately. Marcus spent the afternoon reviewing hundreds of entries. Every comparison produced similar results. Dozens of arrivals, maybe hundreds, yet many never appeared in official records. The omission couldn't be accidental. Eleanor had done it deliberately. The question was, why? As evening approached, Marcus carried several ledgers into the motel office. The desert sky glowed orange beyond the windows. Ryan organized records. Lily reviewed photographs. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "Maybe they couldn't pay." Marcus considered it. Some certainly couldn't. Yet that explanation didn't account for everything. Several hidden guests stayed for weeks. Others received assistance. Some appeared repeatedly across different years. Eleanor wasn't simply offering free rooms. She was protecting something. Or someone. Marcus opened another journal. The familiar phrase appeared again. The travelers still matter. This time it sat beside a list of names. Most never appeared in official motel records. He looked at the ledger, then the photographs, then the interviews collected throughout town. A realization slowly formed. Eleanor didn't hide these guests because they were unimportant. She hid them because they were important. Important enough to protect. Important enough to keep off the books entirely. Outside, darkness settled across the desert. Wind moved softly past the motel. Inside room, 12 decades of secrets surrounded them. Marcus stared at another page filled with names that officially never existed. Families, workers, strangers, travelers, people. Eleanor clearly wanted forgotten by nobody except history itself. Yet one question continued growing larger with every discovery. If these guests were simply people needing help, why hide them at all? Why were they never officially registered? Why were they hidden? The discovery of the hidden guest records changed Marcus's understanding of the motel completely. What began as a strange inheritance now felt like something much larger. Eleanor hadn't simply operated a roadside business. She had spent decades helping people who seemed to exist outside official records. Families in trouble, workers passing through difficult times, travelers searching for second chances. Yet every answer seemed to create another mystery. Why hide them? Why conceal Room 12? And why had someone gone through so much effort to erase evidence of its existence? 3 days passed as Marcus continued sorting through the archives. Every morning he worked on motel repairs. Every afternoon he studied records inside the hidden room. Every evening ended with more questions than answers. The mystery seemed endless. Then Victor Crane arrived. Marcus first noticed the black SUV climbing the driveway shortly after lunch. Unlike most vehicles that stopped at the motel, this one looked expensive, polished, modern,
out of place beside the aging building and faded desert landscape.
The driver parked directly in front of the office and stepped out. Marcus immediately recognized him. Dry Creek wasn't large, and Victor Crane's name appeared often in local conversations. Wealthy businessman, property developer, one of the most influential men in the county, the kind of person accustomed to getting what he wanted. Victor approached with a pleasant smile that somehow felt calculated. "Marcus Hale." Marcus nodded. "That's me." Victor extended a hand. "Victor Crane." Marcus shook it. "I've heard the name." "Most people around here have." Victor laughed softly. The statement wasn't arrogance, just fact. He glanced toward the motel. "Interesting property." Marcus followed his gaze. "That's one word for it. I've always thought so." Silence lingered for a moment. Then Victor got directly to the point. "I understand you've inherited it." "I did. And I understand it's costing you money." Marcus smiled slightly. "That's also true." Victor removed a folder from beneath his arm. "Then perhaps I can help." Marcus already knew where the conversation was heading. Victor opened the folder and slid several documents across the office desk. Marcus reviewed them carefully. The offer immediately caught his attention. The amount exceeded the motel's obvious market value by a considerable margin, enough to solve many of his financial problems, enough to pay bills, rebuild savings, and start over elsewhere. Victor watched him closely. "Generous," Marcus admitted. "I think so." Marcus closed the folder. "Why do you want it?" Victor seemed prepared for the question. "Development? Out here? The highway expansion project is coming." Marcus frowned. "Eventually." Victor nodded. "Exactly." Something about the explanation felt incomplete. Not false, just incomplete. Marcus had spent decades in hospitality. Reading people came with the job, and Victor Crane looked less like a businessman making an investment and more like a man trying to solve a problem. "I'm not interested." Victor blinked. "Not interested?" "No." The smile faded slightly. "You haven't thought about it?" "I have." Marcus slid the folder back across the desk. "Still no?" For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Victor sighed. "Some properties carry more trouble than they're worth." The statement immediately caught Marcus's attention. "Meaning?" Victor glanced toward the motel again. "Old places attract old stories." "Stories don't bother me." "Maybe they should." Silence followed. The warning felt subtle, yet unmistakable. Victor eventually stood. "If you change your mind, call me." Marcus nodded. "I'll keep that in mind." Victor smiled one final time before returning to his SUV and driving away. Marcus stood in the parking lot watching until the vehicle disappeared down the highway. The conversation bothered him, not because of the money, because Victor seemed far more interested in the motel than he should have been. 2 days later, another visitor arrived. Unlike Victor Crane, Helen Foster looked exactly like someone who spent her life surrounded by old records. She was 73 years old, moved slowly, and carried 3 boxes filled with papers. Every resident Marcus spoke to described her the same way. If something happened in Dry Creek during the past 50 years, Helen probably knew about it. "I hear you've been asking questions," she said as she entered the office. Marcus laughed. "Apparently word travels fast." "This town survives on gossip," Helen smiled. "And pie." Within minutes, she became fascinated by Room 12. Marcus showed her the hidden guest records, journals, and photographs. Helen examined everything carefully.
The deeper she looked, the more thoughtful she became. Finally, she adjusted her glasses and pointed toward several names. "I've seen these before." Marcus immediately leaned forward. "Where?" "Town archives." "You're sure?" Helen nodded. "At least I used to." The answer sounded strange. "Used to?" Helen frowned. "Now that I think about it." Her voice trailed off. For the next hour, they reviewed records together. Helen identified former residents, families, workers, travelers. Several names appeared familiar to her, yet each time she attempted to locate supporting documents inside her notes, she encountered the same problem. The records weren't there. "That's odd," she muttered. Marcus looked up. "What is?" Helen removed another folder from one of her boxes, then another, then another. Her frown deepened. "Very odd." By late afternoon, they moved the investigation to Dry Creek's small historical archive housed inside the public library. The collection wasn't large, but it contained decades of local records, school reports, property transactions, community documents. Helen had helped organize much of it herself. If answers existed, they would likely be here. At first, everything seemed normal. Then they began searching specific years, scholarship programs mentioned in Eleanor's journals, community assistance initiatives, records connected to some of the hidden guests. Again and again, they encountered gaps, missing files, missing reports, missing ledgers. Marcus watched Helen grow increasingly concerned. "Something wrong." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled another archive inventory from a cabinet, then another. Her expression darkened. "This isn't possible." Marcus stepped closer. "What?" Helen spread several documents across a table, inventory lists, archive catalogs, filing indexes. Marcus studied them carefully. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Then the pattern emerged. Entire categories of records appeared in older inventories, but no longer existed. Community aid reports, housing assistance records, property agreements, local support programs. Whole sections of information had vanished. Helen pointed toward one date range. Her finger trembled slightly. "Look." Marcus followed her gaze. The missing records all overlapped the same period. Nearly 10 years, a complete decade. Silence settled across the archive room. "That's a lot of missing paperwork," Marcus said quietly. Helen nodded. "Far too much." They checked additional catalogs. Same result. More missing files, more gaps, more unexplained absences. The pattern became impossible to dismiss. This wasn't poor record-keeping. It wasn't accidental loss. Entire sections of local history had disappeared. Deliberately. Helen slowly removed her glasses. Marcus could see genuine shock in her eyes. "I've worked with these archives for decades." "And?" Helen stared at the empty spaces where records should have been. Then she looked toward the hidden motel documents resting on the table. The guest records, the journals, the names. Suddenly, everything seemed connected. Victor Crane's unexpected offer, Eleanor's secret room, the missing travelers, the erased documents. Helen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone removed them." Silence followed. Outside, the desert sun slipped toward the horizon. Inside the archive room, Marcus stared at an entire decade that no longer existed. A decade filled with missing records, missing histories, missing truths. And for the first time since arriving in Dry Creek, he realized the mystery wasn't simply about a hidden room or forgotten travelers.
It was about something much bigger. Someone hadn't just hidden information. Someone had erased history. The discovery of the missing archives haunted Marcus for days. An entire decade of records had vanished from Dry Creek's history. Community assistance reports, housing documents, financial ledgers, names appearing in Eleanor's journals simply disappeared from official records. Helen Foster was convinced it wasn't an accident. Marcus increasingly agreed. The more he thought about Victor Crane's visit, the less comfortable he felt. People didn't offer above-market prices for dying motels without a reason, and they certainly didn't warn strangers about old stories unless those stories mattered. 3 evenings later, Marcus sat alone inside room 12, reviewing Eleanor's journals. The hidden room had become his second office. Papers covered nearly every available surface. Guest records occupied one table. Photographs filled another. Journals stood stacked beside the bed. Outside, desert winds rattled loose signs around the property. Inside, silence surrounded him. He opened another journal and began reading. Most entries described travelers, families, temporary jobs, community events. Yet recently he noticed a pattern. Eleanor often wrote in layers. Important information rarely appeared directly. Instead, she buried clues inside observations and stories. It felt almost like she expected someone to read the journals decades later. Someone like him. Marcus flipped through another notebook, then another. Hours passed. Around midnight, he nearly gave up. His eyes burned. His coffee had gone cold. Every clue seemed frustratingly incomplete. Then one sentence caught his attention. It appeared in an entry written nearly 25 years earlier. Some truths belong behind room 12 until the road is ready to remember. Marcus sat upright immediately. He reread the line, then again. The phrase sounded different from surrounding entries, more deliberate, more specific. He grabbed a notebook and copied it down. The road is ready to remember. The wording felt familiar somehow. He spent the next hour searching other journals. Eventually, he found another reference, then another. Each used similar language. The road remembers. The travelers remember. The road is ready. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The clues pointed towards something hidden, something Eleanor expected to remain undiscovered for years. The following morning, Marcus showed his notes to Lily and Ryan. The teenager immediately became excited. "It's a puzzle." Ryan groaned. "Please don't encourage her." Lily ignored him. "Look at the words." Marcus nodded. "That's what I thought." Together, they spread journals across the desk. By noon, a sequence emerged. Individual phrases appeared unrelated until arranged chronologically. Then a message slowly formed. Behind room 12, beneath the map. When the road remembers. Lily stared at the assembled notes. "There's a map." Marcus looked around the room. The hidden chamber contained shelves, furniture, and records. Nothing obviously resembled a map. Then Ryan pointed toward a large, framed highway map hanging on the far wall. "That one." Silence followed. Marcus walked across the room. The map displayed regional highways from decades earlier. Nothing unusual. Yet Eleanor clearly chose every clue carefully. He lifted the frame from the wall. Something immediately felt different. He turned it over. A small compartment had been built into the back. Lily's eyes widened. "No way!" Marcus carefully opened the panel. Inside rested a small brass key and a folded note.
The handwriting belonged to Eleanor. If you found this, keep going. The truth deserves witnesses. Beneath the note appeared a simple drawing. Room 12. An arrow. A rectangle. Marcus exchanged a look with Ryan. They both understood immediately. The clue pointed somewhere inside the hidden room itself. For the next hour, they searched every inch of room 12. Shelves, cabinets, furniture, walls. Eventually, Lily discovered something unusual beneath the floorboards near the bed. One board sounded different when tapped. Hollow. Ryan removed several screws hidden beneath old furniture. Then he carefully lifted the section. A metal lockbox appeared beneath the floor. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The box looked old but well preserved. The brass key fit perfectly. A click echoed softly through the room. Then the lid opened. Silence followed. Inside rested another key, larger this time, heavier, more ornate, attached to a faded tag. Archive storage. Marcus frowned. Archive storage. Helen arrived later that afternoon and immediately recognized the phrase. Wait. She adjusted her glasses. I think I know what that means. Within an hour, they were standing behind the Dry Creek Historical Society building. Most residents barely noticed the small structure anymore. Years earlier, it served as temporary storage for town records. Now, it sat mostly forgotten. Weeds surrounded the building. Dust covered the windows. Helen pointed toward a narrow steel door partially hidden behind storage shelves. That room hasn't been opened in decades. Marcus removed the key from his pocket. The lock looked ancient, yet the moment he inserted the key, it turned smoothly, almost as if someone expected it to be used again someday. The door swung inward. Cool air drifted from the darkness beyond. Flashlights illuminated rows of shelves stretching deep into the room. Boxes, ledgers, filing cabinets, storage trunks. Hundreds of records. Helen stared in disbelief. My God. Marcus stepped inside slowly. The hidden archive looked untouched. Labels covered every shelf. Community assistance files, property records, traveler registries, educational programs, housing agreements. Entire categories of information missing from public archives appeared preserved here. Eleanor hadn't simply hidden records inside Room 12. She had created a backup archive, a protected history, a safeguard against forgetting. For hours they explored the vault. Every shelf contained new discoveries, missing documents, lost ledgers, community records erased from official archives. The scope stunned everyone. Dry Creek's forgotten history sat waiting in boxes nobody knew existed. As evening approached, Marcus opened a cabinet positioned near the rear wall. Inside rested several wooden cases. Most contained records organized by year. One smaller case sat alone on the highest shelf. Something about it felt different, personal. He carried it to a nearby table and carefully opened the lid. Several envelopes rested inside. Names appeared across the front of each. Travelers, families, former residents, people Eleanor clearly considered important. Marcus examined them one by one. Then he stopped. One envelope sat beneath all the others. Unlike the rest, it appeared newer. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor Briggs. Across the center, written in dark ink, were two simple words. Marcus Hale. Silence settled over the hidden archive. Lily stopped sorting records. Ryan lowered a box he had been carrying. Helen slowly removed her glasses. Marcus stared at the envelope. Eleanor had hidden an entire room, concealed decades of records, preserved a forgotten history. And among everything she protected, one message had been prepared specifically for him. Whatever waited inside had been intended for this exact moment. And suddenly Marcus realized the mystery might not be about the motel at all. It might be about why Eleanor chose him. Marcus didn't open Eleanor's letter immediately. The envelope remained on the table inside the hidden archive vault long after everyone else stopped working. Somehow it felt important to wait. The records surrounding him represented decades of carefully protected history. If Eleanor had gone to such extraordinary lengths to preserve them, then understanding that history needed to come first. The letter would still be there afterward. The following morning's sunlight stretched across the desert as Marcus returned to the archive vault with coffee and a notebook. Helen arrived carrying several boxes of catalog records. Ryan brought breakfast. Lily showed up carrying enough enthusiasm for all of them combined. Nobody needed to discuss the plan. The vault held answers. They intended to find them. For hours, they sorted documents. Financial records occupied one section. Community files filled another. Property agreements and correspondence consumed entire shelves. Every box revealed something new. Every ledger connected another piece of the puzzle. Slowly, the truth surrounding Eleanor Briggs began to emerge. The first major discovery came from a collection of financial records labeled Community Assistance. At first glance, they appeared ordinary. Receipts, payments, small grants, emergency expenditures, yet the scale quickly became impossible to ignore. Year after year, Eleanor spent significant amounts of money helping people who passed through Dry Creek. Travelers received lodging. Families received food. Workers received temporary shelter. Medical bills were quietly paid. Vehicle repairs appeared regularly throughout the records. Marcus turned page after page in disbelief. "How did nobody know about this?" he asked. Helen smiled sadly. "Because she didn't want them to." The answer appeared repeatedly throughout the records. Eleanor rarely attached her name to anything. She avoided publicity. She refused recognition. Most assistance occurred quietly, often anonymously. The deeper they dug, the more astonishing the pattern became. One ledger tracked motel occupancy. Another tracked emergency accommodations. Comparing the two revealed something remarkable. During difficult economic periods, dozens of guests stayed at the motel without paying. Entire families received rooms for weeks at a time. Travelers stranded by vehicle breakdowns often stayed free until they could continue their journeys. Single parents, veterans, seasonal workers, people escaping hardship. Eleanor helped them all. Lily stared at one particular page. She let this family stay for 3 months. Marcus looked over. 3 months? Lily nodded and never charged them. Ryan shook his head slowly. Most motel owners would never do that. Marcus understood exactly what he meant. The motel barely generated enough income to survive. Yet Eleanor repeatedly sacrificed revenue to help strangers. It wasn't business. It was something else. Something personal. Around noon, Helen opened a cabinet containing older records. Inside sat several binders labeled Desert Relief Program. Marcus frowned. "What's that?" Helen adjusted her glasses. "I think we're about to find out." The binders documented an organized assistance network stretching back decades. During severe storms, economic downturns, and regional emergencies, Eleanor coordinated temporary housing for travelers and families in need. The motel served as a central shelter point. Local volunteers assisted. Businesses donated supplies. Medical personnel occasionally provided support. The operation appeared remarkably sophisticated, yet almost nobody remembered it. Marcus flipped through another binder. Emergency shelter, food assistance, transportation support, employment referrals. Eleanor had created an informal safety net for people with nowhere else to go. The motel wasn't simply a business. It was a refuge. Suddenly, her journals made perfect sense. The travelers still matter. The phrase wasn't symbolic. It was a mission. By late afternoon, they uncovered another collection of correspondence. Letters exchanged between community leaders, local businesses, and program organizers. Several names appeared repeatedly. One name immediately caught Marcus's attention. Crane. He looked up. Helen. She moved closer. What is it? Marcus handed her the letter. Silence followed. Then another letter appeared, and another. The pattern became clear quickly. Victor Crane's father participated in many of the community assistance efforts, publicly. He became known as one of Dry Creek's great benefactors. Newspaper clippings celebrated his generosity. Awards honored his contributions. Community projects carried his name. Yet the records revealed a more complicated story. Much of the infrastructure supporting those programs originated with Eleanor. The motel, the housing network, emergency accommodations, volunteer coordination, financial support. Again and again, Eleanor provided resources while others received recognition. Marcus opened another folder, then another. More evidence surfaced. Community events publicly credited to the Crane family relied heavily on Eleanor's assistance. Relief programs praised in local newspapers often operated from her motel. Financial contributions credited elsewhere frequently originated with her. Helen sat quietly for several moments. She let it happen. Marcus nodded. The documents made that much clear. Eleanor knew exactly what was occurring, yet she rarely objected. One letter explained her reasoning directly. Recognition matters less than results. If people receive help, the rest is noise. Marcus read the sentence twice. It sounded exactly like Eleanor. Practical, compassionate, focused entirely on helping others, yet over time, something changed. Public records increasingly emphasized the Crane family's role. References to Eleanor gradually disappeared. Programs became associated with different names. Contributions became harder to trace. Then came the missing decade from the archives. The pieces fit together too neatly to ignore. Someone benefited from history becoming incomplete. Someone benefited when Eleanor's role faded from memory. Marcus thought about Victor Crane standing in the motel parking lot, offering far too much money for a property everyone else considered worthless. The offer suddenly made far more sense. The motel wasn't valuable because of the land. It was valuable because of what it contained. The records, the journals, the truth. As evening approached, they continued organizing documents. Box after box revealed additional evidence. Community aid records, emergency shelter reports, volunteer lists, correspondence. The scale of Eleanor's work stunned everyone. She had quietly changed hundreds of lives. Yet almost nobody knew. Near sunset, Helen opened one final cabinet positioned against the rear wall of the vault. Most shelves contained ledgers organized by year. One shelf held something different. A large ledger wrapped carefully in protective cloth. Unlike every other document in the room,
It carried no label, no title, no dates.
Just a handwritten note attached to the cover. Marcus immediately recognized Eleanor's handwriting. Open last. Silence settled across the vault. Nobody reached for it. Nobody spoke. Because they all understood what it meant. This wasn't another financial record. This wasn't another community report. This was the final piece. The document Eleanor considered more important than everything else, the one she protected above all others. Marcus stared at the ledger resting alone on the shelf. Around him sat decades of hidden history, proof of generosity, proof of sacrifice, proof of truths someone tried to erase. Yet one mystery remained untouched. One answer remained hidden. And resting in the fading light of the archive vault sat the final ledger, still unopened. The final ledger remained untouched until the following morning. Nobody rushed to open it. The records they had already uncovered were overwhelming enough. Eleanor Briggs had spent decades helping travelers, supporting families, and quietly operating community assistance programs that few people remembered. The hidden motel room, the secret archive, the missing records, every discovery pointed toward the same conclusion. Eleanor had protected something important. Now only one question remained. Why sunlight filtered through dusty windows of the archive vault as Marcus carried coffee to the central table? The final ledger rested exactly where they had left it, wrapped in protective cloth, waiting. Ryan arrived first. Lily followed moments later. Helen entered last, carrying several folders compiled from their recent discoveries. The atmosphere felt strangely serious. Nobody joked. Nobody rushed. Everyone understood that this ledger likely contained the final pieces of the story. Marcus carefully removed the cloth. The cover beneath appeared worn with age. Decades of handling had softened the leather. Across the front, written in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. For when truth returns. Silence filled the room. Marcus slowly opened the ledger. The first pages contained detailed financial records, not motel accounts, not occupancy reports, community assistance records. Every emergency shelter program, every aid project, every food fund, every transportation grant, every support effort Eleanor organized across nearly 40 years. The scale stunned them. Marcus turned page after page in disbelief. Hundreds of names appeared throughout the records. Travelers, families, seasonal workers, veterans, single parents, people stranded by circumstances beyond their control. Some received a night of shelter. Others received weeks of assistance. A few received enough support to completely rebuild their lives. Helen quietly removed her glasses. Good heavens! Lily stared at the pages. She helped all these people? Marcus nodded slowly. Looks like it. The numbers were astonishing. During difficult years, Eleanor spent much of the motel's income supporting strangers. Several records showed months where she earned almost nothing because rooms were provided free of charge. During economic downturns, she expanded assistance rather than reducing it. Again and again, she sacrificed business profits to help people she barely knew. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Most owners would never do this. Marcus understood exactly what he meant. Running a motel was difficult enough. Yet Eleanor consistently placed people before profit. The realization changed how he viewed the property. The motel wasn't her business. It was her tool. Halfway through the ledger, the contents began changing. Financial records gave way to correspondence, contracts,
program agreements, newspaper clippings, community reports.
The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. This was where the real secret lived. Marcus unfolded the first letter. The signature at the bottom caught his attention instantly. Charles Crane, Victor Crane's father. Another letter followed, then another, and another. The pattern emerged quickly. Decades earlier, Eleanor partnered with community leaders to create assistance programs throughout Dry Creek: emergency housing, traveler support, food distribution, employment referrals. Publicly, many programs became associated with Charles Crane. Newspaper articles celebrated his generosity. Community events honored his contributions. Awards carried his name. Yet according to Eleanor's records, much of the infrastructure came from her motel. The housing network, the volunteer coordination, the funding support, the emergency shelter system. Silence settled across the vault. Lily frowned. He got all the credit. Helen considered the statement carefully. Not at first. She pointed toward one of the earliest agreements. Marcus read it closely. Initially, the partnership appeared legitimate. Shared resources, shared responsibilities, shared recognition. Then, things changed. As years passed, references to Eleanor gradually disappeared. Public reports focused increasingly on the Crane family. Newspaper articles stopped mentioning the motel. Community histories highlighted one contributor while ignoring another. Marcus opened another folder. More evidence appeared. Financial statements, donation records, public announcements. Again and again. Eleanor's role faded, while the Crane family's reputation grew. Then came the most disturbing documents of all. Near the back of the ledger sat copies of archive directives authorizing record removals, community aid reports, housing assistance files, traveler registries, entire categories of information. The missing decade, the erased archives, the vanished histories. Everything suddenly made sense. Someone benefited from removing those records. Someone benefited when Eleanor's contributions disappeared. The room remained silent as Marcus turned another page, then another. Every document reinforced the same conclusion. History hadn't forgotten Eleanor Briggs. History had been rewritten. The phrase from her journals echoed through his thoughts. The travelers still matter. For the first time, Marcus fully understood what she meant. Eleanor knew records could disappear. She knew stories could be altered. She knew truth could be buried beneath time and convenience. So she created backups, hidden archives, secret journals, protected ledgers. Room 12 itself became a vault designed to preserve memory. Near the end of the ledger, Marcus discovered a sealed envelope tucked between two pages. His name appeared across the front. The room immediately grew quiet. Everyone knew what it was. The letter Eleanor intended him to find. Marcus carefully opened it. The handwriting looked older than the surrounding documents. Dear Marcus, if you are reading this, then you cared enough to keep looking. He swallowed hard and continued. Eleanor explained that she had followed his life from a distance for many years. Family members shared stories. Former co-workers shared stories. Travelers shared stories. Most importantly, she learned about something Marcus never spoke about himself. Nearly 15 years earlier, during a severe winter storm, several unemployed families became stranded at a hotel he managed. Company policy required payment in advance. Marcus ignored the policy. He quietly gave the families rooms, food vouchers, extra blankets, He covered costs himself when necessary. Nobody asked him to. Nobody rewarded him for it. He simply believed it was the right thing to do. Marcus stared at the page. He remembered every detail. The frightened children, the exhausted parents, the arguments with corporate supervisors afterward. He had almost lost his job because of it. Eleanor continued, "Character is revealed when helping others carries a cost." Tears threatened to form. She explained that she chose him because she recognized something familiar. Compassion without recognition, responsibility without reward. The same values that guided her own life. The motel wasn't left to family. It was left to someone she trusted, someone she believed would protect the truth when the time came. By the time Marcus finished reading, nobody spoke for several moments. The emotional weight settled heavily across the room. Eleanor hadn't chosen him because he needed the motel. She chose him because she believed he would understand it. Helen finally broke the silence. "People deserve to know." Ryan nodded. "All of it." Lily looked around the room at decades of evidence. Every single thing. Marcus stared at the final ledger. The truth had remained hidden for decades. Community aid, emergency shelter programs, erased history, forgotten sacrifices. Eleanor's story deserved to be told. As if responding to the thought, Helen's phone suddenly vibrated. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Well," Marcus looked up. "What is it?" Helen slowly lowered the phone. "News travels quickly in Dry Creek." Lily immediately sensed something. "What happened?" Helen looked around the vault, around the records, around the evidence capable of changing how the town understood its own history. Then she delivered the news. "The town council just announced an emergency public meeting tomorrow evening." Silence settled over the room. Marcus stared at Eleanor's final ledger. Tomorrow night, Dry Creek would hear the truth. And deep down, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone was going to fight very hard to stop it. The town hall had not been this full in decades. Long before the meeting officially began, every chair was occupied. Residents lined the walls. Former motel guests sat beside longtime community members, teachers, business owners, retirees, and families filled every available space. Conversations echoed throughout the building as rumors spread from one group to another. Some people had heard about the hidden room. Others knew about the secret archive. A few whispered about Victor Crane. Most simply sensed that something important was about to happen. Marcus stood near the front holding Eleanor's final ledger. 1 year earlier, he would have hated being the center of attention. Even now, he felt uncomfortable. Yet this wasn't about him. It never had been. Across the room, Victor Crane entered through a side door. The crowd noticed immediately. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Victor moved toward the front with the same confidence Marcus remembered from their first meeting. But something had changed. The confidence looked thinner now, more fragile, as if he already knew what was coming. The town council chairman eventually stepped forward and called the meeting to order. Gradually, the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Recent discoveries connected to the Briggs Motel have raised important questions regarding our community's history." A ripple moved through the audience. Then Helen Foster stepped forward carrying several folders. For nearly 40 minutes, she carefully presented the evidence. Hidden records, community assistance programs, emergency shelter documents, financial ledgers, newspaper clippings, archived correspondence. One document after another appeared on a projector screen behind her. Every few minutes, another piece of forgotten history emerged.
travelers receiving temporary housing, families receiving emergency support, workers finding assistance during difficult times. The audience listened in complete silence. Many residents recognized names appearing throughout the records. Some gasped. Others exchanged shocked glances. Then came the documents connecting Eleanor Briggs to programs long credited elsewhere. The atmosphere inside the hall shifted immediately. Financial records appeared. Donation histories followed. Community projects, relief efforts, housing programs, again and again. Evidence demonstrated the same truth. Eleanor Briggs had built much of the support network that helped Dry Creek through its most difficult years. Yet public recognition often flowed somewhere else. Silence settled heavily across the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Helen continued. More records appeared, more proof, more names. Eventually, she displayed copies of the missing archive directives, the erased decade, the removed records, the vanished history. The audience immediately understood the implications. Someone had deliberately removed information. Someone benefited when Eleanor's role disappeared. The chairman finally looked toward Victor Crane. "Would you care to respond?" Every eye in the room turned toward him. Victor remained seated for several seconds. Then he slowly stood. "My father spent his life helping this town." The statement hung in the air. Helen nodded. "No one is denying that." Victor looked around the room. "The records don't tell the whole story." "Then tell us the rest," someone called from the audience. Murmurs followed. Victor hesitated. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared on his face. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledgers existed. The archive existed. The letters existed. The truth had survived. He could challenge interpretations. He could argue details. But he could not erase documents sitting in front of hundreds of witnesses. Finally, Victor lowered his gaze. Things were complicated. Helen adjusted her glasses. History often is. Silence followed. There was no dramatic confession, no shouting match, no public humiliation. Just facts, documents, truth. And sometimes truth proved more powerful than confrontation. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours. One by one, residents shared memories. Former travelers spoke about unexpected help received during desperate moments. Families described temporary shelter that changed their lives. Business owners remembered Eleanor quietly assisting people when no one else would. Teachers recalled children who arrived in Dry Creek with nothing and left with hope. Piece by piece, Eleanor's hidden story emerged. Many people cried. Others smiled through tears. Some simply sat quietly while decades of misunderstanding unraveled before them. Near the end of the evening, the council invited Marcus to speak. He approached the podium carrying Eleanor's final ledger. The room gradually fell silent again. Marcus looked across the audience. A few months earlier, he had arrived in Dry Creek unemployed, uncertain, and convinced his best years were behind him. Now, familiar faces filled every row. Ryan, Lily, Helen, former travelers, friends, people who no longer felt like strangers. He placed the ledger on the podium. When I inherited the motel, almost everyone gave me the same advice. Soft laughter moved through the hall. Sell it. More smiles appeared. Marcus glanced toward a photograph of Eleanor displayed on the screen behind him. Most people thought the motel wasn't worth saving. Heads nodded throughout the audience. The truth is, Eleanor Briggs wasn't protecting a motel. Silence returned. Marcus looked around the room. She was protecting people. The words settled heavily over the crowd. For decades, she helped travelers, families, and strangers without asking for recognition. He paused. She cared more about changing lives than receiving credit. Tears appeared throughout the audience. Lily sat proudly beside Ryan. Helen smiled softly. Tonight isn't about correcting history because Eleanor wanted attention. Marcus looked toward the photograph again. It's about remembering the kind of person she chose to be. The applause began slowly, then spread throughout the room until nearly everyone stood. Not for Marcus, not for the motel, for Eleanor Briggs, the woman who quietly opened doors for people who had nowhere else to go. Before the meeting ended, the town council announced a unanimous decision. The Briggs Motel would receive historical protection. Demolition would never be permitted. Restoration efforts would begin immediately. Volunteers signed up before leaving the building. Local businesses pledged materials. Retired contractors offered labor. Teachers proposed educational programs. Former travelers donated money. What began as a public revelation quickly transformed into a community movement. Over the following year, the motel changed dramatically. The faded sign was restored. Rooms were renovated. Historical exhibits filled portions of the building. Room 12 became part museum, part archive, and part memorial to Eleanor's work. The hidden records found permanent protection. New programs emerged: travelers' assistance funds, community support initiatives, educational exhibits documenting local history. The old motel slowly became something entirely new. Yet it never lost its original purpose. It remained a place where people found help when they needed it most. Nearly a year after the town meeting, Marcus sat inside room 12, reviewing Eleanor's remaining journals. Most had already been cataloged. A few still required organization. While sorting through a box of personal papers, he discovered a small notebook hidden between maintenance records. The pages contained private reflections spanning decades. Near the center sat an entry that immediately caught his attention. $186. Marcus smiled before he even finished reading. The entry dated back more than 40 years. Today I bought the motel. I have exactly $186 left after signing the papers. I don't know if this place will succeed, but every worthwhile journey starts somewhere. Marcus read the passage twice, then a third time. Suddenly everything made sense. Eleanor had left him the motel and exactly $186 in debt. Not because she forgot about it, not because it mattered financially, because it mattered symbolically. The number represented the day everything began. The motel, the travelers, the assistance programs, the lives she changed. None of it started with wealth. None of it started with power. It started with one struggling woman standing beside an aging roadside motel and believing she could make a difference. The inheritance wasn't money. It was a lesson. Great legacies often begin with very little. Several months later, Marcus stood outside the fully restored motel, watching the desert sunset paint the horizon in shades of gold and orange. Children played near the picnic area. Families gathered beneath newly installed shade structures. Travelers checked into renovated rooms. Visitors explored historical exhibits documenting Dry Creek's forgotten past. Laughter drifted through the evening air. The motel felt alive again. Ryan supervised maintenance projects near the garage. Helen guided visitors through archive displays. Lily, now older and somehow even more curious than before, led tours through room 12 whenever she had the chance. Everywhere Marcus looked, people filled spaces that once stood empty. He thought about the day he lost his job, the cardboard box, the uncertainty, the fear. At the time, it felt like the end of something. Now he understood it had actually been a beginning. A young family arrived carrying suitcases and entered the motel office. Moments later, several travelers gathered near a community information board. Nearby, children chased one another across the courtyard while parents laughed. Life moved through the property exactly as Eleanor would have wanted. Marcus looked toward the desert highway stretching into the distance. Travelers still passed through Dry Creek. Some stayed for a night. Some stayed longer. Some arrived needing help. The motel remained ready for them, just as Eleanor intended. For a long moment, he stood quietly watching the sunset. Then he smiled, not because everything in life was perfect, not because every problem had disappeared, but because something had changed. The doubt, the regret, the feeling that his best years were behind him. They were gone. The restored motel had become a desert history center, a traveler's assistance foundation, a community gathering place. More importantly, it had become proof that purpose could appear when least expected. As the final light faded across the horizon, Marcus watched another traveler pull into the parking lot. The motel sign glowed warmly against the desert sky. Families gathered nearby. Children laughed. Friends talked. Life continued. And for the first time since losing his job, Marcus Hale no longer felt like a failure.